as a community to address the housing needs of all our residents. The strong collaborative relationships we have with our local community agencies and organizations will be one of the driving forces behind the successful implementation of the activities and recommendations outlined in this updated plan. I look forward to continuing and strengthening these partnerships, knowing that together we can ensure that all residents have a safe, suitable, and affordable place to call home. I will now pass this over to my housing manager, Eden Grzinski, as well as Janine Fast, who will give the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and welcome everybody. As Kim said, my name is Janine Fast. I'm the Housing Stability Policy and Program Coordinator for the City of Stratford. And before we begin, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping issues. So first of all, as you may have noticed, this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing this recording with you after the webinar is finished in the next couple of days. We also do plan to share this for publicly posting it on our website, so those who weren't able to attend this afternoon would be able to watch it when it's convenient. Also, we are certainly more than welcome, or we encourage your questions on the Housing and Homelessness Plan. So there was a bit of a hiccup because I thought we'd have a chat function, but it looks like some of you have already found the Q&A. So please ask your questions in the Q&A section of this webinar, and we will monitor it throughout and probably leave answering the questions until the end of the webinar. So without further ado then, I am going to first I'm going to give you a little bit of an outline and share what we're going to be actually talking about today. So we will give you a bit of a background, clarify some terms and definitions, talk a bit about the Social Services Department and its role in our communities, and then a bit of a broader context for housing and homelessness plans in general. Then we'll move on to an assessment of housing need and demand and some of the data that helped inform this updated plan. And then I'll share some of the components with you of this new plan, including our new vision and strategic objectives and implementation drivers. Moving on to next steps, and then we'll be open for questions. So I'll now pass the mic on to Eden Grzinski to share some of that initial information.
Thank you, Janine, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and for giving us the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the housing and homelessness programs we offer and our update on our 10-year housing and homelessness plan. To set the context, I thought we'd begin with terminology, as the terms affordable and social housing are often confused. Janine, can you flip to the next slide, please? And while all social housing is affordable, the term social housing, it refers more specifically to a specific type of non-market housing that is subsidized by a level of government. On this slide, you will see the entire housing spectrum, from those who are unsheltered to private market home ownership. And all of these terms here refer to a housing that could be called affordable. So affordable housing can be housing provided by the private, public, not-for-profit sectors, as well as all forms of tenure, whether that's rental, ownership, or cooperative housing. It also includes temporary as well as permanent housing options. And so I think often the term gets synonymously confused with community housing, which we're using to use for the or rent geared to income. Next slide, please. So for the purposes of our report, we've clarified these terms even a little bit further. As the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing has adopted the term affordable housing to refer to a specific form of rental housing in which rents are maintained at or below 80% of the average market rent for at least 20 years. And this is based on grants that we have received in our community area to fund specific developments. Based on community feedback through our consultations, we've also embraced the term attainable housing, which we are using to refer to the entire spectrum of housing options. It's important to note that attainability refers to more than just whether the unit is affordable to the income level of the household. It encompasses concepts like suitability. Are there enough bedrooms for the makeup and size of the occupants? For example, can a household of 5 persons suitably be accommodated in a 1-bedroom apartment? It also looks at issues like accessibility and availability in the marketplace. In addition, and in keeping with the National Housing Strategy and provincial policy guidelines, we're now using the term, we've adopted the term community housing to refer to social housing. This is housing that is owned and operated by nonprofit housing corporations, housing cooperatives, municipal governments, and district social services administration boards. These types of housing offer usually a combination of rent geared to income and or moderate market rents for eligible households. Next slide, please. The City of Stratford is one of 47 consolidated municipal service managers across Ontario. This is a provincial designation. In this capacity, we are responsible for delivering social services to residents of Stratford, Perth County, and St. Mary's. Our work falls into 4 divisions: housing, Ontario Works, Children's Services, and we also operate the Anne Hathaway Daycare Centre. Next slide, please. As a service manager, we are responsible for managing the local centralized waiting list for rent geared to income housing in the community. We provide oversight to local community housing providers, which are listed in the appendix on page 56 of the report, which there is a link to on our website, and we're happy to provide copies if you haven't received one yet. We administer a variety of rent support and other programs. The eligibility criteria and housing benefit vary by program, but basically what this entails is people rent a unit in the private market, they pay rent geared to income or receive some type of subsidy, and we cover the difference between the amount the household can afford and the market rent that the landlord charges. We also administer a number of different affordable housing programs, such as an affordable home ownership program, and we administer grants, loans for new development, which are funded by upper levels of government. Over the past 5 years, we have leveraged these federal provincial investments with local funding from both private investors and the City of Stratford to construct 68 new affordable units that are rented at 80% average market rent or below. We are also one of the biggest landlords in the community. We own and operate 663 units throughout all municipalities under the auspices of the Perth and Stratford Housing Corporation. Next slide. Our work in addressing housing and homelessness go hand in hand. We offer a number of programs and services to people who are experiencing housing instability, are at risk of eviction, are couch surfing, or find themselves without a permanent roof over their head. We offer short-term emergency accommodations through the use of local motels. We provide funds to assist with moving costs, last month's rent deposit, and rent or utility arrears. With COVID, we were fortunate to receive a provincial grant that has allowed us to enhance the emergency accommodation services and rent bank program in our community. We also offer outreach supports to households living in community housing and or staying temporarily at the motels. And through a brand new program that we established a couple years ago called SHOP, we offer intensive case management to high acuity households who have experienced chronic homelessness. Later on in the presentation, my colleague Janine is going to tell you a little bit about the initiatives and work we have underway to help end homelessness. Next slide, please. So you may be asking yourself, why a 10-year plan? That seems like a long time, particularly given the changing environment we find ourselves in today. In 2010, the province released a long-term affordable housing strategy, which set out to transform what was then a provincially controlled housing system into a more community-centered one that addresses the entire housing continuum. Legislatively, with the introduction of the Housing Services Act in 2011, all service managers were required to produce a 10-year housing and homelessness plan and update them every 5 years. The updated plan that this presentation is based on, it builds on the original plan that was released in 2014 and takes into account the progress, consultations, and research that have taken place since the original strategy was released. We began the review process in late 2018 and completed it last year. We received ministry approval earlier this spring and are now happy to share it with you. Next slide, please. If you look at 10-year housing and homelessness plans across the province, you will see some similarities and some differences. Similarities in that all plans needed to address the 8 areas of provincial interest which are listed on this slide. Differences in that all plans needed to be reflective of local community needs. Next slide, please. In order to make sure that our plan was reflective of community needs, we engaged over 100 community stakeholders through in-person meetings. This included individuals with lived experience, local service providers, municipal planning departments and economic development partners, as well as community housing providers. We used a variety of consultation methods, and including the establishment of a digital engagement platform, which was visited by over 250 individuals. Next slide. In addition, we conducted an in-depth assessment of available indicator data regarding the state of housing and homelessness in the community. Next, Jean. In the interest of time, I'm just going to highlight some of the key data in the report, but I highly encourage you to review the report as there's some valuable indicators presented here. The first that I'll speak to, as you see on the slide here, is our area population. As you know, our service manager area is comprised of 6 municipalities: Stratford, St. Mary's, North Perth, Perth East, Perth South, and West Perth. Over 40% of residents live in the city of Stratford, and this population distribution and the rural nature of the service manager area have a significant impact on how services and supports are provided locally. Overall, we are serving a population that is aging and projected to grow at a slower rate than the province. The provincial growth rate between the last 2 census periods was 4.6%, and the only population that outpaced that was the town of St. Mary's. Next slide, please. As you heard in Kim's introduction, we are located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Attawandaront Confederacy. Like other areas across Canada, Indigenous people are overrepresented in the local homeless enumeration, where we found that 18% of individuals experiencing homelessness identified as having some Indigenous ancestry. This is significantly higher than the percentage reported in the 2016 census, which was about 1.5%. Next slide, please. Household income levels are well below provincial medians in our community, about $4,000 per annum. However, the reverse is true when you look at poverty rates. The low income measure for our service manager area is a little bit lower than the provincial rate. So it's 11% here and 14% for the province as a whole. However, it did increase 1 percentage point between the last 2 census periods. Next slide, please. Given that our area is predominantly rural, it will come as no surprise to you that the majority of structures in our community are single detached homes. The challenge from an attainability lens is that this is the most expensive type of dwelling. We do not have a lot of purpose-built rental structures that would be an apartment building with 3 or more units. Most of the rental units in our community would fall into what we call the secondary market. That's converted houses, basement apartments, apartments above storefronts or on main streets. The majority of local landlords, based on our research, own only 1 or 2 units. Next slide, please. I'd like to take a minute to explain how to read the table on this slide because it's very informative. Across the top in dark blue, we have income levels for this service manager area divided into 10 equal percentiles. The next line, the light blue, shows what someone who earns that income level could afford to pay. Think of it as a reverse mortgage calculation. The beige shaded area shows you who can afford what by dwelling type. The average resale prices, which are listed on the left, come from MLS and are from 2018. It will not surprise you that these average housing prices have risen dramatically since then. We are now seeing average housing sale prices in the community in the mid 400,000s. Bottom line, if you look at this chart, what this is explaining to you is in order to have purchased a single detached home at the purchase price of $372,000, a household would ideally need an income of $106,000 per annum. Next slide, please. This table shows you a similar pattern, but for rental units. The rental rates shown here on the left come from a local rental market scan that we did in 2019. We actually just completed another scan of the rental market after this report was completed, and like housing prices, rental rates have also risen dramatically. A bachelor is now running for $1,231, which is up 70% since 2018. 1 bedroom, $1,239. 2 bedroom, $1,421, and 3 bedrooms or more are above $1,700. Basically what this means is a single mother with 1 child would need to earn about $62,800 in order to afford a 2-bedroom rental unit in this community. Next slide. I know that many of you who are participating on this webinar work in social services, so we wanted to share what the affordability picture looks like for our clients who earn low incomes. I'm sure you've heard that of the CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation threshold for affordability, meaning that no one should pay more than 30% of their gross household income on housing. That would include rent and insurance and those costs. This slide demonstrates that this is an impossibility for households who earn below a living wage. Next slide, please. And that takes us to rental vacancy. Let's assume you can afford an apartment. The next question is, can you find one in the local market to rent? The benchmark for a healthy, well-balanced rental market is a vacancy rate of 3%. What we have witnessed locally is a steady decline in vacancy rates since our original 10-year Housing and Homeless Plan was published in 2014. The situation is particularly challenging in Stratford and for small unit sizes. However, vacancy rates are not uniform across the service manager area, so there are areas where, for example, North Perth, that have higher vacancy rates above 3%. Next slide, please. You can see from the previous slides about affordability that there are a lot of households in our community who can't afford private market rental units. So one of the options they have is to apply to us for a subsidized rent geared to income unit, and they apply through the centralized waiting list. As a result, we have seen a skyrocketing demand for rent geared to income units in the past 5 years. The number of applicants on the waiting list has more than doubled since the original plan was released. And in the first 8 months of this year, we've seen another 21% increase in applications. As of August 31st of this year, there are now 498 households on the centralized waiting list. Most are waiting for a 1-bedroom unit, and that is the highest demand. Thank you. Next slide. We also maintain a real-time dynamic list of all people experiencing homelessness in our community. This is called a by name list. I'm pleased to report that we've seen a little bit of positive movement on this list compared to the centralized wait list. As of August 31st, 2020, we had 115 households on the list. The challenge is that 105 or 91% of them are experiencing chronic homelessness, which means that they've been homeless for 6 months or more. It should be noted that in the course of a year, we actually see a higher proportion of individuals that are not experiencing chronic homelessness. They flow in and off the by name list at a greater frequency as their homelessness experience tends to be short-lived, for example, a few nights or a couple months. Next slide. Overall, the highlights from our need and demand analysis show us that income levels are below provincial medians in the community. We have seen an increase in the proportion of households who are living in low income. We have a population that is aging and projected to grow at a slower rate than the province. And we have identified a number of population groups that are especially vulnerable to housing instability, including Indigenous peoples. Since the original plan was published, we have also seen a dramatic rise in housing costs, both rental and ownership, a decrease in the availability of rental units, and a dramatic increase in the number of applications for rent geared to income housing. And without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to my colleague Janine, who will walk you through our updated strategic priorities. Unmute.
Thanks, Eden. Yes, so our updated plan, we have a couple of new components to it now. I'll start with the vision. So everyone has the right to a home that is safe, suitable, and affordable, and to supports that help them keep their home. So this new vision really reflects our local values and goals. It is consistent with the provincial policy directives that we shared on an earlier slide. And then very importantly, it echoes the rights-based approach that's highlighted in the National Housing Strategy that the federal government released in 2017, which clearly states that housing is a human right. So along with that new vision, we have 4 strategic objectives and 4 implementation drivers. And so when we're looking at that as a framework for the plan and for the work that we want to do, we really look at the strategic objectives as the broad what. So what do we need to do in order to achieve that vision? We know we need to end homelessness, we need to create attainable housing options, we need to be able to sustain community housing, and we need to address a diversity of needs. And then the implementation drivers are really those components that we need to carry out those objectives and the activities under them. So Kim already mentioned how key collaboration was in the development of the plan, but also it's a key driver in the implementation of it as well, along with using local and reliable data to really understand what's happening in our communities, providing education and training to raise awareness of issues and build sector capacity, and then measuring success by focusing on outcomes. So really making sure that the activities and the recommendations that are outlined in the plan are having those intended impacts on the community and our residents. So I'll go into a little more detail about each strategic objective. So number 1, ending homelessness. Shifting resources and service provision from managing to ending homelessness with a focus on chronic homelessness. Why this strategic objective? So, well, it reflects the provincial goal of ending chronic homelessness by 2025. It also streamlines the priority areas. Some of you may recall in our original plan, there were 2 strategic priority areas dedicated to homelessness. And this really just acknowledges that there's this coordinated approach that's needed to end homelessness and making sure that the resources that we're using to respond to homelessness, be they monetary or human resources, really are put towards prevention. So helping people keep their homes before they begin experiencing homelessness. And then reduction in terms of helping individuals and families who are currently experiencing homelessness with finding and maintaining a permanent home. And so really acknowledging that that work is all on one, it's part of one broader system. So we haven't ended homeless, or, oh yeah. So sorry, a lot of work has been done in the last 5 years. And so we thought, even though it's a new framework, work's been done, we should share some of these achievements as well that have gone on in the last 5 years. So Eden already mentioned some of the programs that are already out there, but a number of new programs were launched, and they were designed to provide supports to individuals and families who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of experiencing homelessness based on their level of need. Because we know there are some households who would require more intensive supports in order to be able to do this, to find and maintain permanent housing, and then other households that require a little less support. So making sure that this broad range of services and programs are available. On a more systems level, a lot of work has been done in the previous 5 years to really look at how to better coordinate our homelessness response locally. And so some of the components in order to be able to do that is the introduction of a community-wide screening tool to help determine the level of for acuity or need for housing supports. And this is really, again, in order to understand what needs households have to be able to match them to the appropriate services to really help them be successful. Also, having really good local reliable data is very important, not only to understand individuals' experiences and how to support them, but also to really have an understanding of kind of what the broader nature and scope of homelessness looks like, to help with some planning, program planning, and things like that. So some of you also may recall that we conducted 2 homeless enumerations, one in 2017 and one in 2018. And then again, Eden already mentioned, more recently, work has been done to establish and achieve a quality by name list, providing that real-time and reliable data moving forward. So recommended activities moving into 2020 and 2024. One of the really key priorities is implementing a coordinated access system for homelessness services. So I already mentioned this work that we're doing to better coordinate homelessness response locally, and a coordinated access system is sort of the natural next step in that. And it really is a very specific process for coordinating all those different aspects of a homelessness response system in a very standardized way. And that means all those different aspects like accessing, assessing, prioritizing, matching, and referring households experiencing homelessness for those housing services, and also across the entire community and across all agencies and sectors in a community. So it's a very big undertaking, but it's an incredibly important and necessary one in order to do the work. A really important part also of a coordinated access system is the use of a homelessness management information system, which is basically a database. So implementing HIFIS-4, which is the Government of Canada's platform that they've developed, is a really big priority for us moving forward as well. In terms of programming, developing a coordinated mobile outreach across the entire service manager area is another one of those activities. Strengthening eviction prevention programs, really looking at the emergency accommodation and shelter services locally, and moving towards these services to be very focused on housing and supporting those who are using those services in moving into permanent housing as quickly as possible. And then providing, again, that large range of homelessness programs to address all those levels of need. So strategic objective number 2, creating attainable housing options, increasing the range of housing options that is available, affordable, appropriate, and achievable to meet people's needs, situation, and choice. So why this strategic objective? Well, we know we need housing for one. Also, it acknowledges that affordability is one of several factors in housing stability, and Eden talked about that early on kind of in our definitions. It also is intended to recognize that that a variety of housing options are needed, and not just programs to support people, but the actual options themselves in order to meet the needs of households locally. And also that there's a key role to play for municipal partners in helping provide those options along the entire housing spectrum. In terms of achievements over the last 5 years, a number of new attainable housing units were created. That's both through the construction, which Eden also already talked about, 68 new affordable, and that's that very specific 80% average market rent definition were created since 2014. And you can see on the kind of graphic to the side that these units were built in Stratford and St. Mary's and Listowel. Also, 47 new rent supports were introduced over the last 5 years. And again, rent supports are those subsidies that bridge the gap between what a household, the income of the household, and what the cost of market rent is to help provide more stability for their housing. Eden also mentioned the Affordable Home Ownership Program. So 47 households were supported in purchasing their own home since 2014, and that's a program that will be up and running again in the not too distant future. And then also the Survivors of Domestic Violence Portable Housing Benefit supported 17 households who had experienced some form of violence with finding permanent and safe housing. Again, looking in at a more systems level, certainly over the last 5 years, the local municipalities have identified attainable housing as a priority in their strategic plans. Stratford is one of them, but also North Perth and St. Mary's. Also, creating methods to gather local data has been really important. It's been something that's been worked on over the last few years as well to really better understand the local situation. And a good example of that, Eden used some of those numbers in the slides earlier, but a good example of that is the ministry did approve alternate average market rents based on those rental market scans that we were able to do locally. And that allowed us as service manager to enhance some of the housing allowance limits for low income households, which again provided that housing stability for them. And then some sessions and workshops and tools were created and implemented to really increase the capacity for community to understand the need for attainable housing and how important it is, and then also on how to really support successful tenancies to help people remain housed. Moving forward, of course, continuing to create more attainable housing options is a key priority, and that means both through new construction as well as through rent supports. So with the new construction, a key piece of that is collaborating with municipal and economic development partners to create incentives for building those attainable housing units. And then when we're looking at rent supports, really continuing to engage landlords and increasing those housing options in the private market as well. We'll continue to work on new methods and sort of strengthening our methods of data gathering in order to continue to understand the local situation and housing supply and costs. And then also looking at if there's a way to help connect or match people with what's available in rental housing. So for example, is it feasible in our community or viable to establish some sort of community-wide online inventory for that? Strategic objective number 3, sustaining community housing. So ensuring that existing community housing stock is well maintained and continues to play a key role in the delivery of permanent rent geared to income housing locally. Why this strategic objective? So it recognizes the vital role of community housing locally. Some of you again may recall in the original plan, community housing wasn't a separate strategic priority at that time. And so this really is intended to acknowledge that there are different strategies that are needed in order to sustain this form of housing, different from other attainable housing options. And also recognizes that the landscape of community housing is really changing. Mortgages and operating agreements are coming to an end, and that would have a significant impact on the sector. So achievements over the last 5 years, some of them, as service manager, we were able to complete operational reviews with all the local nonprofit and cooperative housing providers that we support in the community. And that was really to gain a better understanding of how to support their sustainability moving forward. Funding was also made available to help make improvements at different community housing properties over the previous 5 years. And then building condition assessments were also and energy audits were also conducted in 18 of the properties to help identify capital planning priorities for when funding becomes available. And then recommended activities over the next few years. Negotiating the end of those operating agreements that I mentioned with local nonprofit and co-op housing providers. So the provision of community housing is set through these agreements with the government, federal and provincial, and over the next few years, these agreements are coming to an end. So there is a possibility that some community housing providers may opt not to continue offering rent geared to income units within their portfolio. And so because of the key role that rent geared to income housing does play in the community, as service manager, we certainly want to support these community housing providers in maintaining these same levels as much as possible. Also making sure as service manager that our directives and policies and procedures are up to date and really reflect what's changing legislatively. During the consultation, it also became apparent that there were some misunderstandings of what community housing is and what it isn't. And so I think supporting education and advocacy in the community to really make that clear and really talk about what community housing and what it offers is a really important thing that that was recommended we support, or that we move forward with in the plan. Community housing stock is aging, of course. It's been around for a while, and so really making sure there's funding available for capital repairs and stock regeneration is really important. And then building capacity in the sector to really enhance providers' ability to continue operating effectively and efficiently. And finally, strategic objective number 4, addressing a diversity of needs. So providing a broad range of services and supports that reflects the unique local landscape in an inclusive and culturally appropriate way, including advancing truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So why this strategic objective? So really it recognizes that there are certain population groups that are especially vulnerable to housing instability. And not only that, but their housing needs are impacted by these experiences or factors that create that vulnerability for them. So it could be socioeconomic factors, stigma, racism, and discrimination. So making sure that not only are there options for services and supports based on individuals' levels of need, but also the type of need that really reflects that diversity in our communities. So moving forward under this strategic objective, some of the recommended activities, one of the things that also became apparent through the consultation was not enough information. Something we weren't actually able to dive deeper into during the consultation was really having a good understanding of what actually was available throughout the community in terms of all supported housing and housing supports, because support services are provided by multiple players in different sectors. Multiple levels of government are involved with funding housing services. So really being able to understand across all sectors in the entire community what's out there is something that was recommended we move forward with to really have that clear understanding. And then on the flip side, also understanding service users, their experiences of navigating that system and where those gaps are and where the challenges are to really make it a much more streamlined, hopefully, and easier experience for individuals using the services. Of course, a key piece of that is strengthening partnerships with organizations across all those sectors to be able to address the housing needs of these specialized population groups. And for us in our service manager area, again, as Eden mentioned, we do have a large rural component, so making sure that access to housing services for residents in the rural parts of the service manager area are available as well. And finally, to build local capacity and to strengthen relationships and provide supports to Indigenous communities and peoples. And this is not just in terms of having the programs available, but also understanding that involving and strengthening and building relationships with Indigenous peoples in the planning and implementation of those programs as well. So what's next? We're continuing to share this updated plan with the public. And like we mentioned, this recording will hopefully be posted publicly so people can watch it. We also, because one of the main implementation drivers, part of this plan is really looking at outcomes and how to measure that and measure our impact. of the activities and recommendations. Developing a framework to do that is one of our priorities, or being able to do that moving forward. And then it's beginning to implement the updated plan. But we also wanted to share there are things, of course, in the earlier part of this year that have already happened, that are outlined in the plan as we move forward. So we're kind of well on our way. A couple of those things include already, we've been working with municipal and economic development partners on opportunities to create new construction. The Coordinated Access System Leadership Group, which is the group that will be overseeing the implementation of the Coordinated Access System for Homelessness Response, was established earlier this month. Also looking at the end of operating agreements and end of mortgages, we started developing a sort of a housing master plan as to what's needed and what we want to move towards with that. Phase 2 planning has begun for Britannia. And then also earlier this year, a new portable housing benefit program, which is through a partnership with the federal government and the province, called the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit, was also launched. And it was designed to assist or provide rent supports to 3 target populations: individuals experiencing homelessness, survivors of domestic violence, and residents or tenants in community housing who are currently not receiving any rent supports, who are paying market rent in community housing properties. So that is the presentation. We're definitely open to questions now. So I don't know, oops. Oh,
So Janine, I have been answering a few of them in the chat while you've been talking. And so I'll just read them out just in case other people have that question. I'm hoping everybody can see this, but if there's any other questions, please feel free to type them into the chat now, and we'll happy to entertain them. We're also more than happy to entertain questions after the fact. I believe on if you got the slide up with our email contact info.
There we go.
You're welcome to reach out to Janine, Kim, or myself, and send us your questions, and we will perhaps post an FAQ on the website and send them out to all attendees. So first question, we got a couple in a few people asked, yes, the slides will be available. So we will email a copy of this presentation to everybody who participated on this webinar, and you are more than welcome to distribute it as widely as you want. We will also post a copy on our website. If you haven't seen the full report, I highly encourage you to go to our website. It is there for download. So what it looks like this, but what we have done here is taken just a few. You like my show and tell, Janine, smiling. Yeah. This is the problem with webinars. We have no feedback from the rest of you. Anyways, the report is there, and we've given you sort of a smidgen of it. It is a long report, but please feel free to take it and print copies. If you want hard copies, please let our office know. So copies of that will be available for everyone, as well as Janine mentioned that we are recording this webinar, so there'll be a transcript if you want to share that. The next question came from Matthew, and he was asking about statistics on information with respect to festival housing or Airbnb for overnight patrons of the theater coming into town. And yes, we heard quite a bit about the Airbnb and the short-term rental accommodation as being a particular pressure and unique to our community, particularly Stratford, as taking some of the long-term rental vacancy, rental units out of the market. We have identified that as a theme in the report and go into a little bit more detail about it, but we do not have statistics at this time on the number of those units that are in the community. This is something that we have flagged and actually have started some conversations with our planning partners here at the City of Stratford to see if there's a way to track this information and start to get a bit of a handle on it. I know that the City of Stratford's planning department is also looking at short-term rental accommodations with respect to its zoning bylaws. So this is an interesting area, and under strategic objective number 2, we'll be hoping to do a bit more research and information gathering on that. I think the next question was about the slides, and I'm just, oh, there's a lot more in the Q&A.
There's that one about if more rent supports will be available again in the near future. I'm not sure if that's something you can speak to, Eden.
We have a variety of different rent supports, so I'm not sure what individuals are specifically questioning. Some of those programs are ongoing, and they have some of them are legacy programs that came to us at the time that City of Stratford became the service manager. They all have different expiry dates, and we definitely work with our tenants that are in existing programs that are expiring to transition them to something else. I think you may be referring to the newest one, which is called the COB that Janine referred to, the Canada Ontario Housing Benefit. This is a rollout of a 9-year program that through the National Housing Strategy. We have only had the first year of allocation, so that is a targeted groups that we have been looking at: survivors of domestic violence, individuals experiencing homelessness, and then individuals who are in our community or current rent support programs that perhaps may be losing because those programs are coming to an end. So those have been our 3 target groups for this year. We will be evaluating those target groups as we move forward and as future money becomes available for us, but it's been a finite amount now. But yes, we are hoping that additional rent supports will be available in the future. Just looking through the question.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question about how HIFIS will be different than the by name list. You want to tackle that one, or you want me to?
You can try it.
All right. Yeah, so basically it's a different platform, and it allows for a lot more flexibility with service providers outside, like across the entire community, to be able to access and share information. There's, I mean, it's such a huge undertaking because there's tons of privacy and confidentiality pieces that need to be worked out first. But a by name list right now, the by name list, it's housed with the City of Stratford Social Services Department, and very few people have access to it, right? Only people who are really managing it and updating it are the ones who have access to it. And so sharing that information is a little bit more difficult, and making sure that that information stays up to date. It's just a more streamlined way to be able to maintain that up-to-date information about individuals who are accessing homelessness services. Eden, anything else to add to that?
No, I think HIFIS is a bigger system. It's a comprehensive homelessness information system, and you can use it. So in some of the larger urban centers, they also use it as their shelter information management system. So it has other functions other than just having a list of individuals who are experiencing homelessness. It is an information, and the new version of HIFIS is a terrific one in that is mobile, and you can share it across numerous organizations, but with high levels of security, so that data is maintained private. And so that's why we have that at the by name list now, because as you can imagine, we know everybody by name, and we know their stories, and so because there is confidential information listed in that, there are certain protocols that we have in place for accessing that actual database.
Another question, Eden, came in. Is the lower median household income for our area calculated relative to the higher housing cost in other provincial jurisdictions, e.g. the GTA?
So you're talking about the low income measure. That is the poverty rate that looks at poverty. That's the Statistics Canada measure, and it doesn't take into account housing costs. The low income measure looks at your income relative to other incomes in the area. So I'm gonna get the formula wrong because it's been a while since I've looked at it, but I think it looks at where you are relative to the 50th percentile median income for that service area. So in Toronto, that the low income measure would be different threshold than it is in a community such as ours. And it's the proportion of households within that area. But if you go into Statistics Canada and low income measure, that's what that threshold is about. It's a relative measure of poverty. And we can post the actual definition of it after with the presentation. I believe we have a reference to it in the report when we quote that statistic.
Another question, do you have an idea of the number of people currently unsheltered in the area at present?
I do not have that at my fingertips right now. Obviously, we do know that through our by name list of how many individuals are provisionally accommodated versus living unsheltered. It is a dynamic number and changes. I can, off the top of my head, I would say it's a handful. We again know all of those individuals by name. A lot of times when somebody is living unsheltered, it's because there are service restrictions for them, perhaps at some of the motels, or we're unable to house them in particular shelters due to past experiences there. But we are connected with them through various programs and outreach programs.
So I'm not sure if there are any other questions. Oh, I just do think I saw one coming in. Oh, it was the thank you. Are there any other questions that people have? Again, if you think of anything after the fact, you're more than welcome to email Kim or Eden or myself. Did we miss any questions? Somebody want to pop in if we missed one? Also, thank you for your thank yous. I see a lot of people have been saying appreciated the presentation, the information in it. So you're very welcome, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and a big thank you to all of you. We took a quick look at who had registered today, because we know many of you were participating in this journey with us along the way of updating the plan. And we will be connecting with you when we go through the implementation. Housing and homelessness is a complex issue. We know it's an important issue for the community, and we need all of your help and input and advocacy and engagement in order to make this plan a reality. So we will be working with you as we move forward to putting the strategies into place. So I think with that, we'll sign off. And again, please feel free to reach out, and we'll make sure everybody who participated got a copy of both the report and the slides.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.